crunch here, where we have a few more people coming from lunch, and we might have a couple or one panelist that will have to leave early because of some different forum. So thank you all very much. My name is André Laperrière. I'm from GODAN. So the purpose of today's session is to share with you the fruits of what has been really months of discussion between a wide range of people from different organizations on the concept of SDG2 accountability. As we know, the world has moved from the era of MDGs to SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. So as a result of that, a number of initiatives took place in different parts of the world where groups found a special interest to focus on one or another SDG. For GODAN, we have a special interest on SDG2, Zero Hunger, so do a number of other people. So as a result of that, a lot of us have decided to work on it and see if we could go beyond just talking about SDG2, but put together some kind of a toolkit, if you will, that would help those committed to SDG2 implementation to better advocate, to elaborate better policies, and then for all of us to keep better track as to the progress that is made towards SDG2 in different parts of the world. So there's been, as I said, lots of discussions, usually virtual discussions. There's been 2 face-to-face meetings, one in London in the spring and then one in New York in July. And what we're going to present to you today is basically the fruit of these discussions. So it's a concept. We have a concept paper that I didn't distribute, but that we can make available if you'd like to see it. But the presentation tries to capture a little bit the essence of this SDG2 accountability paper. The purpose is to get your comments today to see if that makes sense from your respective perspective. And for this, we've assembled a great panel from different backgrounds that will give also their opinion about it. So we're going to try to capture all of your inputs so that we can further modify this concept paper, concept document, to present it as final later on this year. So on this note, because again we're a bit behind schedule, so I'm going to give the floor right away to Sylvia and Gawain, which are going to share with you this presentation we made about the SDG2 concept paper. So, Sylvia, Gawain.
Thank you very much, Andre, and I'm really delighted to be here as part of this wonderful summit and a great initiative. Please take a seat. Welcome. So what I'm going to do is I'm going just to present background to this work to date, and then I'm going to give floor to Gawain to present and give an update on the most recent development. As André has mentioned, what we are really trying to do here is to come up with some conceptual framework and some practical solutions for an integrated accountability framework which could be applicable to SDG2. This is just as a background what GODAN has recently also made available, the Open Data Charter on Agriculture, which gives some kind of a very nice conceptual framework on who the main key actors and conceptual factors are when we are looking at open data, flow of data, and also financial flows which are associated with this. If you are looking in the middle box, for example, you are going to find the key actors who are producing, using, analyzing, and utilizing the data. So here we have, for example, at the country level, farmers, local traders, exporters, wholesalers, all of those people, they produce the data, but they also very much need the data. And I think in one of the working groups yesterday, one of the sessions, one of the participants also highlighted very importantly that it is not only the data which we need from the farmers, but it is also how do we actually deliver the data to the farmers. So we have key actors in the middle. Then we've got different kinds of services which contribute and interact with those actors, including financial services, extension and logistic services, And then, of course, very importantly, the context in which this is operating, policy and operational context. And here we've got, of course, the government's rules and regulations. We've been trying very hard, for example, to work to do budget analysis on nutrition investments in Nigeria. It has been quite hard because of lack of, political will, right regulations, policies, etc. So this conceptual information and context is also quite critical. In terms of the process which we have undergone, as Andre has highlighted, to start developing the SDG2 accountability framework, it was a process which started with one campaign, and this autumn, in April, we had a workshop in London where initial recommendations came out, and an initial paper also, in particular, on the data users' approach to sustainability, to accountability, was developed. Then we met in New York in July, where we further brainstormed, and now finally we are hoping, to have some inputs from you also, what those elements of accountability should be. So we are really at the critical moment now to kind of put together all the pieces, find out the gaps, what is really missing in terms of this accountability framework, in order then to publish our findings in the fall. Obviously, there is a major difference between the MDGs and the SDGs. As we know, accountability was a weak link, or lack of accountability was a weak point in the MDG framework. Now, when we are looking at the SDGs, in almost most of the SDGs, you will find an element of accountability. And in particular, SDG 16 and SDG 17, those which are focusing on inclusive partnerships, but also specifically SDG 17, which mentions data monitoring and accountability, have very specific targets on increasing the availability of high quality, timely and reliable data. So I would specifically argue that in addition to inequalities and environment, really accountability is one of the three critical links of this new SDG agenda. And obviously, when we are talking about accountability, it cannot be, in a vacuum in terms of data and data revolution. Those two are really critically interlinked. When you go to the field, when you live in a remote area, you don't have access to IPC, you don't have access to data. It is very difficult for you to, first of all, hold the governments accountable, to take, part in any kind of processes, to advocate. It is really something which is, those two are really closely interlinked. So I think we really need to look at this in this perspective. Now, obviously, what is critical, we do have SDG2 indicators. We have the goal, we have the SDG2 goal, we have the targets, we have the indicators. But now the problem is in the tier system which has been developed, we have 14 indicators. But out of those 14 indicators, and I don't know whether you have read the slide, but I don't know who knows for how many of those indicators the data is available and the methodology has been established. I don't know whether any of you wants to venture.
Tier 1.
Yes.
So the Tier 1, the methodology is established.
Yes.
And supposedly
Yes.
the data is available.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely. But the tier 2 and tier 3 are remaining. So really, it is quite a critical task which we've got. I mean, we have the SDGs, we have the indicators. How do we track progress? How do we monitor progress if we don't have the data? And if we don't have the methodology? So I think in this context, and also to highlight this point, it is not the problem only of developing countries or the least developed countries. It is really a global problem. Here we are looking at the regional disparities in terms of access to data. It's a slide from the Global Nutrition Report, not the most recent one, but 2015. And when you are looking at all those colors and columns, there's only one conclusion which can be drawn, that across the board, globally, we are lacking data. So, for example, yes, Melanesia or Micronesia are those who are lagging most behind in terms of data gaps for nutrition. But other regions, such as Eastern Europe, for example, and also even Western Europe, they are really lacking behind. There are many reasons for this. Some will argue that data is, for example, in local language, it is not translated, there are different standards which are used, age groups may not be the same. Nonetheless, the data cannot be used for whatever purposes we wanted to use, and in this particular case, obviously, to monitor SDG2. So as part of the previous work which we have done as part of this initiative, we really looked at the data challenges and accountability related challenges, and we established a set of principles already for an accountability framework, but really looking at the data user's perspective. And some key principles which we came up with were, of course, standardization. I think that many people have already highlighted. Consistency and alignment. Transparency, that's quite obvious. Sustainability, yes, we want all projects to be sustainable. Institutional framework and innovation. And I just want to highlight in institutional framework, because that was a suggestion which was coming up very, very strongly, in particular from our Nigerian partners. Because it's good to talk about transparency, it is good to talk about standardization, but really, if we don't have the political will, and if there is no a clear legal and institutional framework which is going to support accountability, it is really going to be difficult for us to progress. So in this vein, we've been really trying to identify very specific challenges, then come up with solutions, and then assign them one of those different principles, or more than one. And we have done that tentatively. We have a paper which came out as recently, so that's available if you are interested. Now the next step which we are doing, and which is a task which GODAN is leading on, is really to try to create an integrated accountability approach. And this is where I'm going to also ask Gavain, as he has been very much leading on this effort, to come up and continue on this presentation.
Thanks, Sylvia, and thanks, Andre, and thanks to all of you for coming. Just a word of introduction. My name is Gawain Kripke. I'm the policy director at Oxfam. I'm based in Washington, D.C. And I've been part of this band of misfits who've been talking about SDG2 accountability for some months now. We sort of launched into this presentation without taking a step back and talking about the SDGs and SDG2. Does everybody know what SDG2 is? Does everybody know it has subsidiary objectives that are around nutrition and agriculture and so forth? I mean, I think it's useful to ask the question, because we're talking about open data in agriculture and nutrition, about what the sort of political context is for this conversation. And for me, SDG2 is the sort of a superstructure, a political superstructure to have a conversation about agriculture and nutrition and all this data. And I'm an advocate. I'm not really a data person. So I start with looking at the goals. The goals of SDG2 are to end hunger and malnutrition, and to improve livelihoods for small farmers and improve agricultural productivity. These are very big goals that world leaders have committed to. And in having made that commitment, creates a political leverage for us. So that's the good news. The bad news, which we're talking about here, is we don't know how to make those goals come true, politically or technically. And we don't even know how to measure whether we succeeded or not. And so this is the complexity in front of us. For the Millennium Development Goals, we had 15 years under them, and they were announced and sort of drifted for many years until being taken up in sort of midterm reviews. And as the SDGs were announced, many of us advocates said, we can't wait years to organize around these. So let's organize immediately to try to make these powerful and meaningful. Now, Are they powerful and meaningful? Well, you'll hear about them every year when the UN General Assembly meets and when high-level political forums happen. But it's our job to make them mean something for poor people and hungry people and people who, small farmers who need assistance. So this is sort of the challenge in front of us, and why we've been meeting and trying to accelerate the process of measuring them and then holding leaders accountable and bringing more stakeholders in. So thinking about how to make SDG2 and how to create an accountability environment has been our challenge, and we focus a lot on the data part. But the data is meaningful if it can be used by advocates, by political leaders, by policymakers, by farmers themselves, by people who are doing nutrition interventions. So these are some of the elements that we thought about, is that we want this data to be used at every level, including at very low levels of user interface, with communities and citizens, with activists at the ground. We would like it to be crowdsourced, or have elements of it that can be crowdsourced. The video, I don't know if you saw it in the plenary, where the fishers themselves are inputting data and collecting it and then using it for their own purposes, is really attractive. And we have all these tools, but can we aggregate all these tools up to make something like SDG2 happen, to make the end of hunger happen? And then hopefully people like myself, advocates and policy campaigners, can work together in this environment to hold political leaders accountable and make sure that they make the investments and bring the resources necessary to bring the end of hunger and achieve SDG2. Over time, a lot of effort has been put into budget analysis, and we've really been fighting a lot about money, which is right. Money is important, and it matters. In some ways, the field of budget analysis, budget tracking, is relatively advanced, although if you dig into it, there's still a lot we don't know about budgets. But that's one area of practice that we have that we can build from. What we have maybe a little less well is data analysis, and even when you have data, you don't quite know how to interpret it, you don't know how to present it, you don't know how to look at it longitudinally or cross-sectorally and so forth. So these are elements that we need to build up, and we need to identify how we get these done, who can do them, how we resource that. This is an example I think Sylvia put in of doing budget analysis work in Niger. Was it around nutrition interventions? Or yeah. So this work is going on. It is going on in countries. I know personally, for Oxfam, we're involved in maybe 30 countries doing budget analysis on especially agriculture budgets and with ministries. So there's a lot of practice that we can build upon in doing this. One of the things that we divided this work into sort of is the data and technical questions, which are big, but then also the policy and advocacy questions and challenges, which are also big. And they're quite interrelated, because it's very hard to do good policy analysis or policy advocacy without good information. And we surveyed a group of participants to sort of get ideas about what the first policy recommendations they might do. I won't go into these in detail, but we have these listed in the paper. I feel like this is a very first cut at the policy goals around SDG accountability, and most of them are sort of first order goals. It's like, we need better data. We need to track R&D in particular, because that's a very important element of the data. We need to improve internal reporting for aid donors and for various ministries. So these are the kinds of things that we think are policy goals that we can start advocating for in the short term. More will emerge over time as we achieve these goals. But I recommend you look at these, and as Andre and Sylvia have said at the beginning, this is not a finalized product. We're very eager to get people's feedback, really your involvement and engagement in this process. Okay, so one of the big ideas is to try to bring as much of the data, analysis, information, and presentation together into a portal of some kind. And some of the specifications of that portal we've been imagining and drawing up some ideas about how to do it. This is, at the moment, an idea. It's not a reality. and it's an unresourced idea. So once we get this idea nailed down, the goal then is to go and fundraise for it and make it happen. But you look at here some of the indicators or ideas about what a portal might be. A place to go where you can access data, you can access presentations of the data. It would be as open as we can humanly make it, although we all know that data needs to be massaged, but be as transparent about what needs to be done in the process of interpreting and analyzing data, making presentations on it, and then using that data to inform policy and interventions. These are some of the things: universal usability. I'm not a technician on data, so this isn't really my area, but we've begun to sort of mock up what it might look like, just to conceive of how it might play out and what it might look like. So these are sort of wireframe ideas about what we're doing. And the overarching concept is around SDG2, Goal 2 of the UN SDGs, and to make reference to the official indicators, but not be confined to them. We can bring in other data, other ideas, and hopefully they're synergistic or complementary, but if not, even if they're contradictory, I think that would be a useful element. So homepage, be able to do analyses geographically and drill down geographically around the world. We would love for this information to be accessible to country-level advocates, analysts, practitioners, policymakers. So if you're in Mali, you can click on Mali and spend your time looking exclusively at Mali, if that's your preference. But of course, we want to be able to do cross-national or global analyses as well. You could look at a single country and pull out the data there, and then you could look by data source with commentary and analysis done from data sources. So this is the idea. These are the basic ideas: resources, papers that are drawn from the data or relate to the data would be posted. This is the basic idea. So we've done a work plan for trying to roll this out, develop the ideas, fundraise for them, and implement them. I think our hope is that we get to do something like this sooner, maybe in first draft form, and build it out over time. I only show this to you because I think it's useful for you to conceive of this as an actual project. It's an unrealized project and one that we need help on. So it's sort of an invitation to get involved. We'd love to have more people involved. It's been very open-ended at the moment. Really, anyone who's willing and has time can be part of it. I got recruited by Andre because I said I might be willing to help, and he said, "Okay, you're in charge of this part of it." So, and these are our next steps about designing the website, doing some more political mapping and advocacy, trying to have stronger tie-ins with national and country-level efforts. We feel a real weakness. We feel like this so far has been a London, Washington, New York-based enterprise. We really want to have more involvement from stakeholders in developing countries. And I think this is quite a beautiful imaging. I suggested putting it onto the slides. But it's both beautiful, but also shows you the difficulty and complexity of assigning data and information towards goals. On this side of the chart are the SDG2 indicator or sub-goals. And on the right is budget information, ODA this is from OECD data. And trying to say, okay, well, if a donor spends money in agrarian reform, which goal does that help meet? And so you see these linkages like that. But it's not clean, it's not easy. This is a complex image. And so it's clear we have a long way to go before we line up resources clearly towards the goals, when we line up information that we have, or data sets that we have, towards the goals as they're laid out in the UN documents. I think I'm quite worried about the big challenge in front of us, but also very inspired by the goals themselves, by ending hunger and malnutrition, and by helping these hundreds of millions of small producers around the world. So I hope you'll join us, and maybe this will be food for thought. Turn it back to Andre for the rest of the program. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Gawain and Sylvia. Now I'm going to invite some panelists that we have invited to come and share their experience and their initial reaction to this concept. Now, to be honest with you, they have an advantage over you, which is that they have received the actual paper, which you don't have. So I realize that the presentation is kind of a very light summary of what the concept is, but hopefully through the presentations and comments we'll be able to add more information for you. So in terms of the panel, we have first Dr. Geraldo Marta from Embrapa, from Brazil, which is going to be our first panelist. So if you could just... So first I will invite all the panelists to come here so it will be easier. The second one is Karen Fabry from DG Research. Karen, if you can join us. Third one, Judith Duncan from the State Department. Then Alberto Sandoval from Transversal, Mexico. And Kiran Gaikamo from Cadiz, Kenya. So we try to have panelists from different parts of the world to give us a different kind of flavor or reaction to the concept. So on this, we will start with Dr. Marta. I'm sorry I sort of interrupted you because he will need to leave at some point because of some other commitment, so you won't need to apologize, so just when you need to go. But please come in and share with us your views.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Thank you for already apologizing because I need to leave a little bit earlier. And also for this kind invitation. My name is Geraldo Marta. I work for Embrapa. Embrapa would be the research arm of the Brazilian Ministry of Agriculture. And we recently, together with the Brazilian government, we joined the GODAN initiative. We're very keen to see this initiative to move forward. And specifically in the case of Embrapa, we work with Ag Research, our sister agency here in the US. It will be the Agricultural Research Service. And I'd like to share with you some of the things that happen in Brazil. I'm not sure if all of you are aware, but up to the 60s, Brazil received food donations from, for example, from the USAID. Up to the early 80s, we were one of the biggest food importers in the world. And what happens is that in a space of a generation, in about 30 to 40 years, we transformed agriculture in Brazil. What was the secret? The secret is that there's no such a thing as agriculture for development. We believe there is a science-based agriculture for development. And this is the main characteristic of Brazilian agriculture. This, for instance, is also the main characteristic here for agriculture in the West. Just to give you a very important number, today technology represents 68% of farmers' income of the agricultural product in Brazil. 68. It jumped from 51% in just one decade. So the world is becoming more and more dependent on technology, and if we're not able to, to take this technology to farmers, they will be really in big trouble. So moving very fast, when we are talking about food and nutritional security, agricultural production is of course a very important part of the thing. And when we are discussing on how to increase agricultural production within the farm, we are talking about increase the area, increase the yield, or more generally, increase a little bit of both. This is what happened in Brazil in the past 6 decades. What you can see anything actually. So we need some assistance here. Okay, now we're good. I'm not sure if this was okay for you. Okay, so in this table, what I am putting here is the yield increase, the land productivity increase in Brazil for the past 5-6 decades. As you can see, the reference point is 1950, and every major crop in Brazil has increased dramatically the productivity. Here talking about generally from 3 to 5, a little bit more than 5 times during these 5-6 decades. And if you look a little bit with more attention, you're going to see that up to mid-70s there was not such a huge increase. That was the part that we believe that we already had all the things we needed, and we just need to transfer that technology. And then in the 70s, Embrapa started to put together a new philosophy that we need to develop science. Science is going to fuel the extension system, and then this extension system will get farmers moving forward. When we are talking about expanding land, we are always associating this with a bad thing, but I might say that not necessarily it was going to be a bad thing. In the case of Brazil, I'm not sure if you are aware, but 65% of corn production in Brazil comes as a second crop following soybean. So we are expanding corn area in Brazil, actually doubling the times we can make a crop in each hectare a year. So this is huge, and this is not bad at all. We are increasing the intensity of cultivation. And if we increase the productivity further, for example, using these amazing integrated crop livestock systems, what is the secret of those systems in Brazil? High yielding crops put together with high yielding livestock. If you do not have high yielding pasture livestock component with a high yielding crop component, the thing is not going to work very well. And because of these amazing gains in productivity over the past 6 decades, this is the reason why Brazil today, in spite of having this huge territory, I'm not sure if all of you are aware, but Brazil is a little bit higher than continental US, so we are really a big country. And 62% of the country is still preserved because of those productivity gains. We call these land-saving effects. Those land-saving effects amount in some number a little bit over 600 million hectares in the past 5 to 6 decades. So because of this, you go for Amazon, for example, we are talking about 80% of the Amazon biomes is still preserved. This is amazing considering that Brazil is a major player in the world in the agricultural market. One huge benefit to consumers is that by increasing the supply much faster than the demand, the price to consumers decreases steeply. And this is what we are talking about. If the consumer, if they have more time, more money, they can choose what they want to buy, and more importantly, the foods start to represent a lower share. So this happened in Brazil, and because of this, because of the income effect, the poor people in Brazil had a better nutrition, and also they had money to buy other things. For example, electronics, cars, whatever is the thing. And the most important part of it, perhaps under a policy perspective, we had more production, people which is, they had access to better nutrition, and quite importantly, with practically no incentives. This figure here is showing that in the past 20 years, as an average, the Brazilian agriculture, the Brazilian farmers received on average 1.6% as incentives. So the meaning of this is that the Brazilian farmers, they are pretty much exposed to market signals. They are only going to adopt technology, they are going to do things if they think this can pay. And because of this, when we are talking about what metrics, we need to take a whole picture. I'm not going to discuss, but I want to let you with this 4 blue decision points here. One is what to produce. That depends on a lot of things. And please pay attention, this happens before even start to plant. Then we need to choose how to produce. And in the case of Brazil, where farmers, they are pretty much exposed to market, relative prices play a very important role. And here is one very important thing. When you see market imperfections, probably market imperfections is the major cause not allowing farmers to adopt technology more promptly. And why was that? Because with market imperfection, the universe of technologies available will change. If you go to small farmers, to poor farmers, eventually they are going to have access to more expensive inputs, and when they sell their products, they are not going to receive the better price. So this is what I'm talking about, market perfection. And then, after you decide what to produce, how to produce, after choosing this technology that is very important in Brazilian agriculture nowadays, you need to move to the production phase. And of course, as soon as you end this production phase, you have the decisions on when to sell, how much to sell, and so forth. But here comes the thing, how we link this to data. All this process here is, must receive a huge amount of data. And here are some examples. All numbers I just presented, they were made with open data already available, but sometimes you're not aware they exist. For example, we have the data from our Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics that just released the open data plan. You have data from CONAB, a sister agency of the Brazilian Ministry of Agriculture, many things regarding prices in several places in Brazil. You have, of course, all the images from Brazilian Amazon, the Brazilian Cerrado, the other biomes. This is an initiative between the Brazilian Spatial Agency and Embrapa. We call this Terra Class. We are monitoring the Amazon territory since 2008 and the Cerrado more recently. And of course, you have the whole bunch of publications at Embrapa that can help farmers, that can help extensionists and other fellows on understand a little bit better how to produce. And here is the thing. All those data are available, are open, they can be processed, but most of the countries that are accessing those data are not countries from the tropical environment. They are, we're talking about the US and China. So we really need to improve our communication here. And of course, we have all the information regarding the weather, the soil conditions, this kind of stuff to add the planting, and all those new things regarding the apps. And we could move, could give a step forward, going to bioinformatics and all this kind of things. And of course, robotics, mechanizations, and so forth, so forth. Just to conclude, because my time is very limited here, this is good news. We already have a lot of things available. But this is the information for 2008 and 2014, where you can see the share of households in rural Brazil with access to a computer. It jumped from 8 to 23%. This is good, but it's still not good. With internet access, it jumped from 4% of the households to 22% of the households. And here is a very complicated issue because only half of those 22%, they have Wi-Fi access. So if we're talking about all this new technology, if they need a fast connection, it's not going to work to 90% of the Brazilian farmers, or they're going to reach their office or something to get access to that information. And this follows a trend all over the world, the use of mobile phone. And today, 74% of the households, they are already declaring they are somewhere, somehow using the mobile phone. Finally, scaling up will depend on a multi-stakeholder approaches. Depending on the perspective of the guy in the value chain, the key data will vary and the goals will vary, so we need to put everybody to talk each other, otherwise we're in trouble. Knowledge exchange, capacity development, technology transfer, well-functioning input and market chains are key components. You know, in Brazil, as I already stressed it for you, less than 2% counts as incentive. So farmers, they do need to understand how markets, how is market working, what they can do to survive to such a situation, and how to get profit in that situation. And at last, but certainly not least, we need to expand much further human capital. We need to provide, more education, more orientation. We need to develop marketable skills, human capital. And for this end, I would add that this part of international collaboration is pretty much important, Andrea. It doesn't matter how big is the organization. Embrapa is pretty big, USDA is pretty big, ARS is pretty big, but we can do nothing alone. We need actually to move together because we can do better, we can do faster, and the results, of course, will be much better. What I have to say is this. I am the coordinator of our cooperation program here in the US and based in Washington. If you need to reach me, my contacts are there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Geraldo. I think you covered a lot of ground, but I take 4 points in particular from your presentation. It came out pretty strongly. I think that Brazil went from a national focus on fighting hunger, going from being a food importer in the past to going beyond addressing the zero hunger challenge nationally, but now being able to sort of contribute to addressing it internationally. It was also striking how much data is available from Brazil, but then you also mentioned at the same time that even though data is available, it's not maybe used as much as its potential would allow. Last but not least, and that's probably the point that strikes me the most, is the importance of advocacy. When you say on one hand there's a need to involve to get everybody on board to fight hunger and to get the SDG2 implemented everywhere, which is very much right. But you link that to education, and I think education is true nationally, internationally as well. There's a lot of education to be made towards SDG2, explaining what it is and why it's important, and helping draw out the roadmap that will allow the countries to meet its challenges as well. So I hope I'm capturing a little bit the spirit of what you said. If so, then I'll give the floor to our next panelist, which on my list here is Karen. So Karen Fabry from DG Research, please come, the floor is yours.
Is it all right if I stay here, Andre?
You can stay here. Stay there.
Yes, it is. So thank you very much, Andre, for having welcomed me to be here today. I really am honored to be here. It's my first time in New York, so it's also very exciting from a personal point of view. And it also takes me back in time because over 25 years ago, when I was doing my graduate studies, I was working with Landsat imagery, doing image processing for soil erosion assessment, for watershed management. I was actually using aerial photographs, so looking through a stereoscope. I don't know how many people in the room have actually remembered doing that, but this goes back to quite some time ago when we really started to use this type of data for agriculture, for watershed management, for multiple purposes. And so I've kind of left that realm since some time, and I'm so delighted to be back amongst you because it really brings me back in time. So I'm going to tell you what we're doing at the European Commission with respect to food and nutrition security research and innovation, with respect to open data, with respect to the SDGs. It's a lot. I actually have a lot of slides, and I've just decided to trash them because I think it's better that I just talk to you about it instead. And I'm suffering from PowerPoint fatigue. So let me tell you what we're up to in the EC. I currently lead a team that is developing an initiative called the Food 2030 Initiative, and I'm going to tell you about that a little later on in my talk. But what we're trying to do in the European Commission now is to foster research and innovation to future-proof our nutrition and food systems. So what does the EC actually do? We have a multiple role. We wear many hats. We are a regulator, so we make policy like the Common Agricultural Policy. We have food safety policy, common fisheries policies, so on and so forth. We are a funder, we are an investor, and we have the power to convene actors from around the globe. So how are we funding research and innovation? Well, we're doing so through a program called Horizon 2020. It's a new name we've given to our framework programs for research and technological development, which were formerly called FP1 all the way to FP7, and now we call it Horizon 2020. So this program has a duration of 7 years. It began in 2014 and will end in 2020, and we're providing over 80 billion euro of financing in different forms, mostly through calls for proposals, through fellowships, and through infrastructures, for instance, for research and innovation. So we're now in the process of developing this Food 2030 initiative, as I mentioned. It's a new research and innovation policy narrative to future-proof our food systems. What do we mean by food systems? We mean all that considers inputs, so ecosystem services, all the way to production, processing, packaging, distribution, logistics, take-up, the effect of food in the gut, the effect of food on health, and all the waste streams that are associated with the food system. And one way we think we need to improve the way we're doing research and innovation is to take a food systems approach which links the land and the sea. Just to provide a context, and I think this context has been already provided by many speakers since the beginning of yesterday. We are really living through a perfect storm. So climate change, resource scarcity, population growth. We know that we need to do something because our food systems will not endure the challenges ahead. So something has to change, and research and innovation has to step up to the challenge to make that change. All of this was born from last year, actually, around this time when we had the Milan Expo, which lasted about 6 months, and during which the Commission had over 200 events. And the conclusions of that led us to really think what had to be done next to step up research and innovation. And at the end of that process, in October 15th of last year, my commissioner, Moedas, together with Commissioner Hogan, announced publicly that we would build a food research area without really knowing what that was going to be, but we had some ideas. And we've been working on that ever since. And this idea is going to be launched on the 12th and 13th of October, so next month in Brussels. And I'm going to invite you to watch. We're already full up, so be happy to invite you via live streaming there. So we recognize that there are opportunities for R&I breakthroughs, especially using the transformative power of ICT and transdisciplinarity, so multi-actor engagement, bringing in a diversity of actors within the research and innovation space, also to democratize research and innovation. We see that in Europe there are investment opportunities. The EU agriculture and food sector employs 1/5 of the workforce in Europe. That is a huge amount, and it represents 6% of GDP and also 7% of exports in value-added food products. But we recognize that the food industry, the agriculture and food industry, has been somewhat traditional and hasn't really been investing sufficiently in research and innovation in comparison to, for example, Japan and the US. So we think that there is an opportunity there. This Food 2030 basically is promoting a food systems approach to research and innovation, as I said, connecting land and sea and farm to fork to gut and back. It's a measure to better structure, connect, and scale up EU research and innovation in Europe and also in a global context. To step up EU investment, both public and private, and to mobilize international stakeholders to tackle global challenges. We are addressing food and nutrition security through 3 research and innovation priorities. The first one deals with nutrition, so reducing hunger and malnutrition, addressing food safety and diet-related illnesses. Climate, through building climate and global change resilient food systems. Circularity, by implementing sustainability and circular economy principles across the food chain. And innovation, by creating market-creating innovation and investment while empowering communities. We're doing this through 4 drivers, the first of which is open innovation, the second which is open science, so it relates directly to many of the things we've been discussing today, research breakthroughs, as I mentioned, and another element which might be of interest, seeing there's many people here from outside Europe, is the open to the world dimension. so fostering global collaborations and alignment of R&I agenda between and amongst countries. And with respect, we've also recently been engaged in a high-level policy dialogue with Africa, where the EC is cooperating with the African Union on food and nutrition security and sustainable agriculture. So we're going to see some very interesting initiatives coming up soon around that space. So what's happening with respect to the EC and the SDGs? The MDGs were covered by the EU 2020 strategy and the EU Sustainable Development Strategy. And you have to know that our statistical office has been publishing every 2 years a report that monitors the take-up of the MDGs in Europe. Now, I suspect that they're probably thinking how these measurements can be adapted to the new SDGs. Our EC work program for 2016 foresees far closer links between with the SDGs, and we've just had a European Parliament resolution last May, which calls for a common position of the EU for the integration of the SDGs, and in particular welcomes the disaggregated and accessible data for monitoring, which is being discussed here. And most recently in June, we had a report published called Sustainability Now by our EPSC service, which recommends governance structures to implement SDGs, sustainable financing, in particular for sustainable cities and food and nutrition security. So basically, we're getting our house in order to tackle the SDGs. We've also set up an expert group on SDGs, which is providing advice on the role of science and technology and innovation for implementing the new 2030 agenda. And there are policy recommendations which state that we should switch the focus from technology transfer to building innovation capacity, that we should strengthen partnerships with the private sector, and that we need to walk the talk, that we need to ensure the domestic integration in Europe of the SDGs in science and technology activities. We need to improve policy coherence and benefit from the data revolution and put efforts in monitoring and evaluation. We know, however, that to implement the SDGs, whether it's SDG2 or the other SDGs, we need to fill data gaps, and this will require innovation, innovative solutions, human and financial resources, learning and capacity building between statistical offices and researchers. We will need a much better understanding of sustainable development pathways, accounting for interlinkages between economy, technology, environment, climate issues, human development, and planetary boundaries. We'll also need to assess how we can meet the SDG goals simultaneously, looking for synergies and perhaps accepting that there will be some trade-offs. We see Food 2030 as a vehicle to support the measurement and analysis of the SDGs, and also we hope to be able to convene around this issue. Because we know that R&I is needed for data collection, data integration, modeling, analysis, decision support, science policy interfaces, engagement, and new business models. So just a few words on how we're dealing with open data. I think some elements were mentioned yesterday with respect to the European Data Cloud, which includes the European Science Cloud, and this European Science Cloud is meant to come up with an action plan at the end of this year. The high-level report on the Open Science Cloud will be coming up soon, and it will outline challenges, recommendations, governance, and suggestions for implementation. I'd also like to inform you that under Horizon 2020, we actually have dedicated calls for open data infrastructures, and now all our research proposals or research projects that we are supporting, the default option is in fact open research data. And through these calls, we are engaging with many institutions that are taking part in GODAN. One last point with respect to Food 2030 and the fact that we are building something called the International Bioeconomy Forum. That is a platform to convene funders, basically, international funders around issues that need to be, around which we need to have a conversation. That can be thematic or horizontal, and we are setting up a food and nutrition security chapter there. And so one of the first issues, working groups that will be established as a multi-country dialogue will be looking at the microbiome, plant, animal, and human microbiomes and how these can be linked. So this is an example where open data is really at the heart. Lastly, I'd like to invite you to participate via live streaming, if you're not already registered, to our high-level conference on the 12th and 13th of October. We have the participation of a number of commissioners. We'll have innovators, entrepreneurs, researchers, policymakers, and NGOs. And we have dedicated discussion panels, one on nutrition for healthy and sustainable diets, climate resilience, circularity, and lastly, investment and innovation. So we hope that you'll be able to follow us live stream and send in your comments via Twitter, because we are having a Twitter campaign to solicit ideas for what to do next. So I can just conclude that food and nutrition security is a key priority for EU research and innovation, that nutrition and food systems do face a perfect storm, and R&I has an important role to play, that we need a new level of ambition, impact, and focus for nutrition security in research and innovation, and Food 2030 aims to engage and mobilize and connect with actors to do that, and is a response and will respond to and deliver on SDGs and COP21 commitments. And open data for FNS is at the heart of Food 2030.
Thank you very much for this, Karen. You said so many things, it's hard to capture the whole thing in just a few words. But I'll just emphasize 2 points that you mentioned, that beyond the overall commitment of EU and DG Research in particular to help address the SDG challenges, including the SDG2, you put a lot of emphasis on monitoring and EU's capacity to monitor and keep track of the MDGs, and now its evolution towards doing the same for SDGs. So that's very much in line with the model that we're proposing. So there's and that links to the second point I really liked in what you said is the emphasis on, you mentioned in different ways, common position, getting together, looking at this together. So the convergence, or the, I'm not sure what the right word is actually, but working together, linked to advocacy, I guess, is the key to SDG2 success, and it's also in line with the concept that we're proposing. So on this note, I'll give the floor to Judith Duncan from the State Department. If you could briefly tell us what your shop thinks about SDGs, SDG2, and the concept paper. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'll be brief. Thank you for including me on today's panel, and thanks to the GODAN Summit and to the for their leadership on the SDG2 accountability framework. It's really inspiring, and we're appreciative. I'm from the State Department. I work in the Office of Global Food Security. We're situated in the Secretary's office. And I want to take a few minutes to walk you through some of the priorities that we have and explain how we've been using and intend to use data systems. We're a unique office in that we're not programmatic, but rather we're very forward-thinking, looking down the line to determine the next challenge and obstacles to solving food insecurity. We're almost like a little think tank. 2 years ago, our new Special Representative for Global Food Security, Nancy Stetson, who you heard yesterday in the morning plenary session, joined the State Department and expanded our priorities to include a focus on climate-smart agriculture, food security as a national security issue, urbanization trends, and data. Long before the SDGs took center stage last year, the Special Representative asked me for a comprehensive map of where food insecurity exists, and all I could respond with was, "I wish." And that's how our office got into the data business. Before I talk more about our efforts to use data, I want to say that from my perspective, as I advise on policy, the data landscape is very difficult to navigate. Even existing data that we use to answer basic questions like how many people in the world are hungry could start with the caveat, well, we have found that comprehensive data sets on hunger and malnutrition at the global scale on which the international policymakers rely is presented at national levels and is not disaggregated across urban, peri-urban, and rural areas. This is a huge potential problem for the accountability situation within SDG2. For example, those of you in the room are probably familiar with the notion that 3/4 of the world's hungry and malnourished people live in rural areas, and 1/4 live in rural areas. We use this figure like it's a fact, but it is not based on results of any survey or index on global food security that is disaggregated at a subnational level. Such an index has never been produced. Instead, it's based on the World Bank's analysis of global poverty. The most recent analysis, published in 2013, states that 78% of those living in extreme poverty live in rural areas. Given the high correlation between extreme poverty and food insecurity, we can then assume that 3/4 of the world's food insecure people live in rural areas. Or can we? The World Bank's assessment is unfortunately outdated. It is based on household surveys conducted between 2000 and 2010. Obviously, there has been significant movement in people since then due to conflict, climate change, impacts, and other factors that are not reflected in these surveys. The survey data doesn't account for the difference in cost of goods and services in rural versus urban areas, and there's no common global definition of what constitutes an urban settlement. The urban definition employed by national statistical offices varies widely across countries, and in some cases has changed over time within the same country. This gap in data on food security in urban areas is just one example of the major challenges we face. It's not that the World Bank has done anything wrong, it is that we basically don't have the information we need, and that's a huge challenge. And it becomes more relevant given the SDGs in today's discussion. If we don't know where the world's hungry people are, how can we even begin to end hunger? These critical gaps and questions are definitely a two-way street. Policymakers are impeded by the lack of detailed information about global hunger and malnutrition on all sorts of food security, but particularly on urban food insecurity. And at the same time, it's up to policymakers to request and, more importantly, fund researchers to analyze more comprehensive, recent, and detailed information. This could lead to better informed investment decisions and greater reductions in global poverty, hunger, and malnutrition. To begin to address all of these questions, our office has been a founding contributor to Project 8. Project 8 is a digital demand commons that has been built to help predict the future of all human needs, beginning with food insecurity, agriculture, and nutrition data. The project is a partnership between Nielsen, the Demand Institute, Accenture, Salesforce, and the UN Foundation. The platform has a beautiful interface with excellent visualization capabilities and also serves as a social network for folks to ask questions, collaborate, and otherwise engage around data. We are using Project 8 to help understand what data exists and where critical gaps lie. Without a comprehensive collection of existing data, I'm not really sure where we start. We also have to think about other opportunities to collect data rather than to aggregate data. There's a scientist out of Stanford that we've been working with a bit who has recently published an article in Science magazine explaining his work on the use of machine learning and satellite imagery to identify poverty. What if we could use machine learning to identify food insecurity from satellite imagery? We have to start thinking big, I mean really big. There are so many people working on so many innovations, and everyone's excited about the opportunities. The challenge is that not everyone is aware of what everyone else is working on, and there are a number of competing interests. Turning quickly to the SDG2 accountability framework before I conclude, and the SDG data portal. I'm encouraged by the time, energy, and great minds who have thought through the accountability structure that we're discussing here today. It's really something to be reckoned with, and I personally appreciate all of the time and efforts people have put in. A data portal for governments to track their progress against SDG2 is critical in meeting our goals. I will say, though, that this is going to be very complicated. As all of the SDGs are interconnected, it is going to be difficult to have siloed portals, but that's something for the panel discussion. My opinion is that this challenge is worth thinking through sooner rather than later, though there is obviously no lack of complication in my suggestion. Let me close by saying that I'm grateful to those who have spent their time putting this framework together. It's important to have a plan, and it's important that accountability be central to that plan, and that data be central to that accountability. Thanks.
Wow. That was right to the point and very brief and just. I see a lot of commonality between what you've expressed, Judith, and what the previous speakers have expressed, including one on the fact that there are a lot of gaps in us or in anybody trying to draw the picture of SDG2 implementation as it is now and onwards towards the future. And I think in the concept paper that we produced, we acknowledge these gaps. And in fact, our recommendation is to start in a modest way, tracking what can be tracked. And then as research progresses and more data becomes available, then expanding the tracking capacity of that portal. So that's, but you also mentioned that indeed there's a lot of data out there, but with uneven quality, so that's, that would be, this is a big project ahead. You also pointed out to the fact that other SDGs there's also attempts to track other SDGs also, which leads to another challenge. How can we synergize instead of working in silos or in parallel, if there's any way to kind of combine and work together? Because as some of you may know, already there's a number of other initiatives focusing on other SDGs, which have sort of evolved in their own way. So maybe now's the time to reflect and see if there's a way to come back and reintegrate a little bit more. Well, that's just my, thank you. So the next speaker will be Alberto Sandoval from Transversal, Mexico. Alberto.
Thank you very much. First of all, congratulations for the event. I think it's a good opportunity to have the mic and say to other people that this has been a brilliant event. And I think I told you, Andrea, that I used to work in FAO, and I never saw something so practical as your initiative of this event and GODAN in general. In my case, I also will change completely my presentation because actually I can't even find a new one. I will maybe talk more in the fashion to give my opinion or advice for the presentation of a concept note. I think is very important. Well, Transversal is a think tank in Mexico. We call ourselves GLOCAL because we like to be global and local at the same time, which is a very complicated link, and maybe part of my advice will be also in this line. The umbrella we decided to work in this think tank is metropolitan governance, especially because consumption is what really changes the way we manage natural resources, agriculture, and maybe climate change as well. So behavior at the end, it's really limited by the indicators of all these development goals or whatever we measure in society. So we think that in metropolitan governance or city governance is where we really have to communicate what's going to happen in the rural areas and of course in agriculture and forest and natural resources in general. I had the opportunity to work in the genetics of the SDG2 when I was in FAO preparing Rio Plus 20. What I remember at the time is that the very first thing that happened was a huge fight between WFP, FAO, IFAD, and then with some countries. So at the very beginning we were fighting if the problem was nutrition, if the problem was agriculture in FAO, or IFAD, they were complaining that the problem was on finance. At the end I think David Navarro did a great job, and I'm very happy now that I can talk whatever and not politically incorrect because that was my previous job. David Navarro at the time, he did a very good job saying like, listen, maybe the main problem is nutrition. That's what the SG wants. And it was some good tapping the table, like we will work on five things, which I think everyone more or less agreed. But still very complex, because nutrition, it's a work that still I think needs much more advanced information in the cities. Our president last week said that he's very proud because Coca-Cola is feeding all our country. I think still we were discussing with one of my former colleagues that she's studying the taxes on soda in Mexico, if that works or not. Anyways, I think information on nutrition is very important and really changes that. Secondly, the resilience of ecosystems close to production systems in ag. We always think about how we're going to produce in less space, with less resources and whatsoever. But it's very complicated when the consumer has to know that if they're consuming something that it's reducing the resilience of ecosystems, then this will have a huge impact on the livelihoods, not only for humans, but of course for humans on a big way, but also for the other neighbors of these animals and plants. I think that also scale matters a lot. The discussion on SDGs has been a very good and comprehensive discussion globally. But at the end, when you work at the local level, and that's what I wanted to show in my presentation, but kind of fine, sometimes they don't really care about these super global aspects. So I think if you're going to build a portal, or I think it would be very good if you can build guidance to countries, you have to remember that local circumstances, as it's said on climate change, are extremely important. Like I would put an example. There are producers that their main problem is that they cannot export their products to the US, that's the case in Mexico, or to certain cities because of animal disease or plant disease. So for them, the most important indicator in order to produce and to do a good life is to have indicators about that. They don't really care about nutrition or on their nourishment or stunning kids. But maybe if you go to another region, such as the Horn of Africa, then the main question is: you have food, yes or no? They don't really, they cannot have the opportunity to choose what kind of food. Then I think it's important to link that part between what the country decided in the UN and what the local governments, communities, or initiatives have to include there. I think another very important point that was a bit, I was said already with the previous commenters here, is that the SDG2, in fact, has to be connected to water, to health, to education, to climate change. This is 33% of the problem or the solution of climate change. It's in the world is 70% of the water consumption, agriculture. In Latin America, it's sometimes even 90% in certain countries of water consumption. So, although in the SDGs, in those other SDGs, there is no link to animal disease or to plant diseases or agricultural consumption of water, I think it's impossible to forget that. So I highly recommend that at least you have maybe a customizable part on your system. I think my final comment is that for sure I think countries need good guidance. I think this is a great platform, and I think when you're talking about open data, it's really important to link all these other processes. And the last process I want to link to recommendation for you is that the open government is becoming a very important initiative in many countries. It's not only a matter of being transparent, but also to enable citizens to participate in the decisions in the countries. I think I was in a meeting on the World Bank like 2 months ago, and they were explaining how they are wondering what's going to happen in a country where political parties are on a declining fashion, and what's going to happen with all the investments if the new leaders are going to come from civil society in general, not from political parties. So that means that the open government initiatives are going to become extremely important to have robust systems of information and robust decision-making systems where maybe this new world and this new system of democracy and decision-making processes will start appearing in the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alberto. I think what you described complements very well what was said earlier, where you also emphasized the issue of data gaps, referring to rural areas or sectors like nutrition, which needs much more data in certain areas. You also pointed out, that's a new element, the imperfection of some indicators. For instance, if we were just to track what is the production of food, it's not fully telling because it's not just producing the food, but being able to bring the food where it's needed. And whether it is because of transport, import, export restrictions, or animal disease, or other factors that prevent the food from reaching its destination. It just shows that these indicators are at times imperfect. You also mentioned the need to look at synergizing between this SDG2 initiative and whether it is what is being done on other SDGs, but also other initiatives such as open government, which in a way facilitate or should facilitate the monitoring of progress or lack of SDG2. So on this, I'll give the floor to our last speaker, to Mr. Kiribati Kamo from Canis, Kenya, to give us his views on SDG2 and so on. Welcome, Kiribati.
Thank you very much, Andre. And I will actually be speaking not about the big institutions and the big farmers. We're talking about the smallholder farmers. And the biggest challenge that you face in making SDG2 addressed in that case seemingly changes from being the person who has to interpret data to a person who has to generate data so that it can help them. And if you look at the videos that we have seen today, you saw somebody who was going to catch fish and then was contributing data for use to pay them. We did not, unfortunately, we didn't see them having to weigh what they caught, so that it can be the basis of paying what they actually were to sell. But we saw that they actually had a figure that they gave for themselves. One of the biggest challenges that we face with smallholder farmers is one, my colleague mentioned, that in Africa our biggest problem is not even whether we actually have nutritious food, it is whether we have food. And to even produce that food, the people who are the farmers to produce the food, the average age is normally an advanced age. In Kenya, we see that the average age of a farmer is 60 years. If you told that person to interpret data so that they can produce, then you have a big problem. So what is it that can be done in an environment that is so different from all others so that you can be able to address the SDGs, particularly SDG2? I'll give you an example of some of the cases that I have seen because I also visit a lot of other countries in Africa and look at the challenges they are facing. And our biggest problem is, other than just talking about anything SDG, we are having stunting in children, meaning the nutrition is low. When you actually go and look at the areas where the stunting is taking place, it is the places that are most productive, not where there is hunger. So what is the problem? So these are the challenges that maybe we actually need what Sophie mentioned, the institutional dimension. And we need to actually look at how can we change the dynamics of undertaking agriculture and delivering nutrition knowledge to our people in the farms, in the rural areas. And then it becomes very clear at the end, what you see is that you require channels of delivering knowledge. And what we do at the Center of Agriculture and Agricultural Network and Information Sharing is that we look at what has been the challenge that has been facing our people, and we discover our extension has died. So even telling people what crops to produce is itself a challenge. The governments that were supposed to be providing the extension service are not providing that anymore. So we have changed the model. And we are saying that let us change the curriculum of our educational institutions. I teach in the University of Nairobi. So we actually now have to have the students going to offer extension service and make the curriculum change in line with what my colleague again has said, that education has been to be linked to SDG2, so that we can have knowledge-driven production that is being provided at very low cost on the basis of students who are learning and gaining. The farmers get the knowledge, but now you organize them so that they create a cooperative, where that cooperative is the one that harnesses the extension services that these students are going to be offering. We have been doing this and have proved that it's working in one of the counties in the country, and we want to be in a position to actually say that we may be having a solution that we can actually make the portal have some content that can actually talk of things that are being addressed by the farmers, so that farmers are themselves benefiting from more productivity because of the knowledge the students are giving to them. And the students are getting the exposure and know-how of dealing with real agricultural issues as they earn their credit from the university. And then the university itself is actually seeing itself contextualizing its learning curriculum on the basis of what is working. And in the end, if you aggregate whatever is being produced and there is extra, then you can actually now create a different dynamic in the value chain of production, and you can now create a sustainable enterprise that is being driven by the farmers and with the knowledge that is coming from students. Which students you will actually select on the basis of the knowledge domains that will actually go to these communities will be based on what is required so that you can create a thriving enterprise. So you will actually be having data that will actually be about what varieties of crops are most suitable, because there will be linkage with the extension and research from the universities and other research institutions. You will actually be having knowledge of what inputs are necessary to go and treat the soils that the farmers have, because you'll be having people who are working with soil sciences and are working with the communities. You'll actually be working with people who are understanding everything about the livelihood that is involved in the communities where they come from. So in the end, you'll actually have micro data that will actually be aggregated going forward, and you'll actually find that you have enormous data that you have captured in one location, aggregate that going forward, and you'll be able to have big data that requires now to go to a cloud server somewhere, and then if you anonymize that, you can actually get the big data that we're talking about. So we don't want farmers to actually be requested to give the data We want a win-win where they are themselves providing the data because they are benefiting from the relationship they are getting from the people who are collecting the data. Then the less can be done at the back end, and that is what the data center at the university is offering to do, and we hope that we can partner with GODAN to make this happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kieran Guy. There's something I especially liked in your presentation here, because it's you used the expression knowledge-driven production. That made me think of a number of things. For instance, in this concept paper, as in most discussions pertaining to SDG2, we think of we aim at tracking progress or lack of towards implementing the SDG2. But sometimes we have the tendency to describe this tracking a little bit as in a passive way. So we'll just check and see if it's happening or not. Well, you're proposing to go one step further and to say we should not just passively monitor what's going on, but we should feed in this information to help people prioritize as to where production should happen or where the gaps are so that active action, proactive action happens. So I think it's a nice concept that you're bringing there, and we should definitely incorporate in the paper, linking the monitoring to the advocacy in this very active way. So thank you for that. So we still have about 15 minutes. I would like to open the floor for comments, questions. You don't need to agree, you can disagree, we're all open to suggestions. In fact, we need that. So I see one hand already at the back. So if you could just identify yourself, unless we have a microphone to go around. But
I'm Summer Allen, I'm from IFPRI. Can you guys hear me? My only suggestion, IFPRI has a lot of portals already. Sitting with a colleague that works on ASCII, tracking agriculture and technology indicators. In my division of IFPRI, we've been funded by the EC to create food security portals, and we've been tracking for a number of years indicators related to food security and agriculture across the world. And so my suggestion, and I personally feel like there's a lot of desire to open new portals and to start having new portals, and I understand that, and ours is definitely not the prettiest that there is out there, and it could use some improvement. But I would like to think as of the GODAN community to think as a team and think, do we need another portal? Can we build on one that exists already? I mean, we would be happy to host a complete, SDG2 tracker, or I'm sure other groups would too. It sounds like Project 8 is doing something similar as well. So I think earlier today we discussed the need to work together on open data and to have it, identify a process.
I'll just state that we have in fact discussed that question, and that indeed there are already a number of portals available out there that could or could not do. I don't know, we haven't really dwelled into it, but the principle that you're describing is very much agreed, that we should not try to reinvent the wheel. So if there's something already available out there, be it a tracking system from EU or somebody else, or be it a portal like the one you're describing or another one, I think it should be built on. So we're fully on board with that. Please.
I was expecting to hear about the way in which the UN Statistical Commission was taking forward the standardization and collection of data to be able to monitor the indicator side of the Sustainable Development Goals. That was discussed in March last year, discussed in March this year. Considerable investment was committed by a number of ODAs in terms of upgrading the statistical agencies in each national government. What has happened to that, and is there a parallel setting, rather like the lady behind me was saying, of other ways of creating information in each country? So I thought this was a national statistical analysis that would take place, owned nationally by local parliaments and local civil society.
Thank you very much for this question. I think it's very relevant. So I don't know if one of our panelists would like to respond. Did you raise your hand? I'm not sure who can. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. One of the things that is happening with the national statistics and the relationship that we have had with the GODAN initiative, because Kenya has actually been involved in trying to address the issue of linkage between the Bureau of Statistics data and the GODAN data. And one of the things that we did appreciate, and the Bureau of Statistics did appreciate, is while it is very true that there are existing systems and processes of data collection and aggregation as is done by the Bureau of Statistics, the digital dimension that is brought by the opening the database so that you can collect the data for GODAN does not dilute the systems and the scientific processes that they use. What has been happening is that they are themselves now working to enabling the agents of digital data collection that is widening the space for data aggregation from the digital dimension that we are using for all the data, and particularly using the farmer initiatives that are existing on the ground, because dynamically the farmers are collecting and aggregating their data. It is for the Bureau of Statistics to actually look at what is the formatting of the data as received from the systems that we are sending using whether mobile apps or it's aggregated using computers that are receiving that. And it's at a pilot state for Kenya, so I cannot say that conclusively they have been very happy or unhappy about it. But I can see that there is a consensus that the marriage of the two will eventually make the data collection process a bit more convenient and more effective than has been the case in the past. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kieran Guy. I was going to also ask Karen, I don't know from a DG research point of view, because you're putting a lot of emphasis on monitoring and tracking. Have you looked at this issue of national statistics capacity to do that?
Well, as for most, say, European policy work, we use the capacity of the European Statistical Office, Eurostat, combined with the capacity of the Joint Research Centre, the European Environment Agency, and all of them play a role in bringing together data from the 28 member states. And bringing together data is not something that you just, call for and it's done. There's a whole process. There's a whole policy process you need to convene the member states, you need to agree that there's a problem, you have to make funds available to ensure that data will be collected in a sustainable manner. So it's a big, big task, and so putting it together is only part of the process. And that's for national, that's for Europe-wide statistics. And often what we see in research projects, and we wonder why at times the output of research projects is not terribly useful in the science policy interface at European level, is that it gives fragmented data, sometimes very detailed data, but when you can't necessarily use it to make wider EU policies. So that's the trade-off between, let's say, research and innovation on a case study scale with respect to the needs to monitor over time at a European scale.
I would just add, yes, Livia, please. Yeah, please do, but speak loud, please.
Okay, so my name is Livia Misico, and I'm with the International Institute for Sustainable Development, and we are part of this group. I can speak today. So in terms of your question, so yes, so we have the global indicators that were approved through the UN process, where each groups of statistical agencies representing different countries participated. They had a bunch of meetings, and now we have a set of indicators, and Sylvia showed that some of these indicators are considered well-defined with accepted methodologies, and there are some that are not that well-defined, questionable methodologies.
I'm from the Earth Institute.
Yes, so just for the context. So now what's happening is that there's kind of two processes. So one is kind of a more bottom-up process coming up from the national level. Let's say some countries, they already, while these global indicators have kind of indicative character, many countries now many investments are happening in rich areas. And basically this platform, therefore, not just look at the endpoint, but look at the bubble in between, so that you can actually really make countries accountable, stakeholders accountable, and make a more stronger link between what needs to be done and how to do it. And a lot of the SDGs indicators are on the end and not the how.
I can maybe add one more comment also. I will not expand so much on the UN part. If you wish, I will during the break. I'll tell you what I. But this group has discussed this issue of the capacity of the national statistics bureaus in the different countries, because in an ideal world, to track SDG2 or anything happening on a global scale, you would take data directly from the countries. But acknowledging the fact that there are huge data gaps and there's a capacity problem or institutional problem in many parts of the world, a compromise will have to be made, at least as a start, having in mind that some organizations, especially those focusing on agriculture, might have, in some instances, more information than the country itself might have. So initially there would be a combination of sources for these indicators. Sylvia.
I have a slightly different question, perhaps to, I don't know, any of the panelists. One of the key things which we've been trying to do here is also create some kind of an integrated framework, integrated accountability framework. So, we're putting a lot of different pieces and elements into this toolbox. And the ITC obviously is, one side, and then the data portal fits under this. Then there is policy side, there's advocacy side. We've been trying to think also a little bit about participation, human rights, etc. Are there any other critical elements which you can think of, which, this accountability framework, integrated accountability framework, really should have inside? That's more kind of from a conceptual point of view.
Alberto.
I think also my reflection about the previous two and your comment. I was having the national statistics for agriculture in Mexico, and sometimes it's very difficult to go at the same speed as the farmers need to go, because when you have to do the national statistics, they must be very robust, although sometimes it's better to predict the future than analyze the past. But anyways, that's the problem. And on the other hand, when it's about uploading information from the farmers or from certain institutions that are not official, it becomes very complicated. So I think GODAN or these kind of initiatives, I think you're right, they should be adding efforts with all the current portals. I fully agree on that. But then communication will be very fast and then very efficient in terms of making this happen. But I think at the end there will be a space for third-party accountability to government and maybe even to the UN. Because when we're looking, when we visit farmers, is that they need information of what's going to happen the next month or maximum in 6 months in order to take decisions and to act very fast. And I think with climate change, the same is going to happen in the cities. They will have to know which products are going to be available, very nutritious, and with the best price. So, yeah, I think
Thank you.
sounds like a good idea, this.
Thank you.
On the conceptual, I think the critical challenge that always faces any new thinking is trying to identify, yes, right now we have identified GODAN as a structural, institutional framework to go, but it will be necessary then to now dissect the entire expectation of this initiative into very clearly defined activities that will actually align with what does it relate with, to collect the data that will be needed to advise on those particular parameters or indicators that have been identified. It is only then that requesting the national initiatives to come in with particular contributions to that, pieces of data that will actually be necessary. And as Adre mentions, you may find that what you may require or find being a critical driver in one country will actually be different when you go to another. So it may be necessary to look at localizing the identification of what critical parameters you want to take in one context different from another, but have a general framework that will be guiding you based on the results that you are interested in capturing. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirigai. I'm sorry, I'm going to give the last word to Judith, if I may, because she didn't speak last, because now our time is up, so we'll have to conclude.
Thank you. I think just broadly, it's really important to think about the number of different stakeholders, obviously in this conversation, which is not only represented here in this room, but in the GODAN partnership more generally, and also all the folks that came together to talk about the framework. I would advocate that when we're talking about data and trying to track these very complicated, very complex indicators, that a broad bottom-up approach is something that should be taken into consideration. I think that there are a number of voices that are going to be inherently left out of this process simply because they're not necessarily involved in the policy making at the level at which some of these conversations are happening, but that doesn't mean that those voices are not absolutely critical to achieving the SDGs. And so in the data conversation, when folks are speaking about it at a very high level, I would just encourage that we think about those who would like to participate that may not be in this room.
Thank you very much, Judith. So I'll just try to conclude. I will say that I'm very grateful for all the comments that we've received, the questions and the answers and the elements. I take from what has been discussed that one, there is indeed a lot of data available out there. We have the example of Brazil, EU with its monitoring system that's been in place for a long time, and other organizations as well, evolving now, trying to adjust, of course, to the reality of SDGs. So that maybe could be emphasized a bit more in the document. The need, second, was the need to ensure synergy, if not coherence, either between the different SDG initiatives, as well as in terms of the portals or other avenues proposed in the paper, to make sure we take in account what already exists, so again, to build on it instead of trying to reinvent the wheel. The Kiringai's expression, what was it again? The knowledge-driven production, so therefore having a two-way monitoring, so we're not just monitoring SDG2 progress, but we're feeding in, trying to help the countries and the populations, in fact, make progress in addressing SDG2. So, and then the challenges are many, ranging from data gaps that exist, so will require some compromise initially. Can be many indicators already imperfect for the reasons that we've discussed. Yet there are some initiatives like the open government that should help in the long term. There is some effort to increase the capacity of National Statistics Bureau, so even though in some cases it may take more time, meanwhile other alternatives are there to help monitoring. Greater emphasis on advocacy, because there's a lot of education to be done, both at the institutional level as well as at the farmers, the users level, as to what's good, especially in relation to nutrition. Finally, I took a note of IFPRI's Project 8 and other institutions or projects that could contribute to the materialization of the proposal in the document. Phew. I hope that captures it. I thank you all very much. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to all of you. By the way, this is not the end of the program. Now there's a fairly short break, and then we're going to have the hackathon winners back in the plenary, followed by the EcoSoc ceremony. Thank you.
Thank you.